What a day, ladies and gentlemen, what a day on the swirling waters of Gloucester, Massachusetts. The two famous schooners have rounded the final buoy and are flying to the finish line. It's all come down to this, years of sometimes bitter rivalry. And here we are in what is surely the final race to determine once and for all which is the fastest schooner in the North Atlantic. The American challenger Gertrude L. Tebow from Gloucester, or the reigning champion Bluenose, the pride of Lunenburg, Nova Scotia, Canada. The International Fisherman's Trophy, $10,000 in prize money, but more than that, national pride is on the line. This is a race for the ages.
They were born upon the tide, the legend lives the whole world wide, standing tall against the wind, winning boats and iron men. It was 1921, it was Nova Scotia's sons, built the schooner bound for fame, and the Bluenose were named.
This is the story of the greatest fishing schooner ever built. The story of Bluenose, the pride of Nova Scotia. And like Bluenose too, the original schooner was a thing of beauty, not just a workhorse, but a racing thoroughbred. She was born out of the hands of sailors, shipwrights, and fishermen, all from Lunenburg, Nova Scotia, hard-schooled on the waters of the North Atlantic. They built her to work on the fishing banks 600 miles off the coast, winter and summer for weeks on end. Grueling, dangerous work, a hard way to make a living. Over the side they would go, in two-man dories, into the unforgiving waters of the North Atlantic, hauling up hundreds of pounds of fish and trawls, fighting against the heaving swells. These men, these veterans of the North Atlantic, they could be lost in a single storm. So many never came back. At the Fisherman's Memorial in Lunenburg, more than 600 names are chiseled into the cold black granite. Over the generations, Lunenburg has lost more than 150 ships. 40 of them went down with every man on board perishing. Families were devastated. Some villages lost every male old enough to go to sea. But there were good days too, racing the schooners back to home port, loaded with cod. Getting there first was not just for sport, but for the title of Highliner and the bounty paid on their prize catch, extra money to feed their families. And that was life under those majestic sails. Out of the rush to port came what was called a hook. It happened when two vessels came upon each other, and it was game on, my friend, a race to home and bragging rights to the winner. There was no greater rivalry than between the fishermen of Lunenburg, Nova Scotia, and Gloucester, Massachusetts. In 1920, when the America's Cup was postponed because the elite yachtsmen complained it was too windy to race, the hardy fishermen of Lunenburg, the boys who braved the gales of the North Atlantic, they scoffed. Them yachtsmen don't know what they're doing. They demanded a real race with real sailors, fishermen. And those demands were heard by Halifax newspaper publisher William H. Dennis. He put up $4,000 in prize money, a fortune in those days, and a stunning silver cup as tall as a small boy, beautifully engraved, a trophy for the victor. And out went the challenge, and let me tell you, No yachts in this race. This race was only for men who worked on fishing schooners. Lunenburg was to be represented by the Delawana. Gloucester answered with the Esperanto. These fishermen from Lunenburg, or sail draggers as they were known, reveled in their belief that they were so damn good they had the race in the bag, that they didn't even have to try. They were sorely mistaken, and they got trounced. Those Americans in the Gloucester schooner Esperanto, they swept the series in 2 straight races. They took our money, took our trophy, and they went home, leaving the stunned spectators and sailors empty-handed on the wharf. And get this, when those Americans sailed from Halifax Harbor, they lashed a broom to Esperanto's mast to mark the sweep. It stung, and that day, Nova Scotia made a vow. We would never be bested again. As the Americans headed home, the Nova Scotia boys wasted no time in plotting their comeback. They commissioned a young Halifax naval architect, William Ruy, to design a vessel that could take on Gloucester's best. The shipwrights of Lunenburg knew the challenge was great. They had to build a working fishing schooner for the North Atlantic fishing grounds. But at the same time, she had to be fast. Not just a workhorse, but a racing thoroughbred. And make no mistake, my friends, the biggest and most pressing challenge? She better bloody well win. But Angus Walters, he had no doubts. The skipper and project manager of the schooner's design was determined, and he knew what he wanted. Bluenose, she would be a beauty, was launched with great fanfare and sent out to the Grand Banks to prove her worth on the fishing grounds. Angus, firmly at the helm, could feel the life of that schooner in his hands. The vibration of her sails, the spars and rigging, it all became one with the fearless skipper. He learned what made Bluenose tick, and she responded. On her first season out, she was the highliner, and she was fast. They were ready to take on the schooners of Gloucester. And take them on they did. The Americans believed they had a winner in the schooner Elsie. Angus was so confident that when the 2 schooners neared the finish line and the Elsie broke her forward topmast, Angus Walters, always looking to win a fight but win it fairly, he ordered his men to take down the same amount of sail. Bluenose won the race and won it handily. She took back the cup and the money and Nova Scotia's pride. It was a sweet, sweet victory. They held the races for another 2 years. In the 1923 competition, the celebrated Angus Walters and Bluenose were disqualified for missing a navigational buoy during a race. Angus was defiant. He stubbornly declared Bluenose to be the winner, and when the judges disagreed, he withdrew from the series. Bluenose, still in her prime, went back to the fishing grounds. A few years later, in August 1927, Bluenose and her skipper would face perhaps her biggest challenge, a matter of life and death. Bluenose was fishing off the bend of Sable Island, with its treacherous, shifting sandbars that have taken down many a ship and their crews. The graveyard of the Atlantic, this place is called. Without warning, a gale came up, a reminder that this place is not for the faint of heart. Angus and his entire crew, they sensed that the darkness was upon them. As Bluenose battled across the sandbars, Angus Walters and his crew, they knew that everything and everyone could be lost. Angus, in an act of sheer bravery and determination, sent the crew below and lashed himself to the wheel. He manned the helm through the night, while the crew down below prayed for a miracle. Angus never gave in, commanding Bluenose to give him one more win in a fight against the howling winds and the raging surf. And she did. She survived the August gale where many didn't. Bluenose limped back to port. She would fish and compete another day. But if she didn't race again, and soon, the legacy of Bluenose could be forgotten. The world was changing with the Great Depression of the 1930s, and fishing was changing too, with modern trawling vessels. To make a living, the now famous Bluenose was forced into service as a Canadian ambassador, with stops at the Chicago World's Fair and King George V's Silver Jubilee. Bluenose became an iconic symbol of Canada's nautical fame. In 1937, the image of Bluenose was engraved onto Canada's dime, an enduring and constant reminder of her famous legacy. Finally, in 1938, came the call to race. The American schooner Gertrude L. Thibault was built for one reason, and one reason only: to beat Bluenose. Skipper Angus was reluctant to accept. By now, Bluenose was well past her prime. But Angus was a fierce competitor, and he hated to turn down a challenge from Gloucester. This time, as he headed south into American waters, Angus knew that retaining the International Fisherman's Trophy would be no sure thing. At the start of one of the races, Angus was horrified as the wheel that he used to sense the pulse of Bluenose came off in his hands. With sheer will and ingenuity, they patched up the old schooner and raced her, pushing Bluenose to speeds even faster than she achieved in her glory days. The race series was tied with 2 wins each. One single race would determine who would win the trophy. It was quite the sight. The Thibault took off like a runaway train, but Bluenose came charging after her. Angus pushed the schooner he loved so much to the breaking point, and she answered him. They said she came on like a wild horse. 2 minutes from the finish line, Bluenose surged ahead of Thibault to cross the line first. She had kept the cup and secured her place forever as Nova Scotia's own Queen of the North Atlantic. In the lean years that followed, Bluenose fell into disrepair. Angus tried unsuccessfully to save her, but in the end, he had to let her go. He sold Bluenose to a trading company. She carried bananas and rum in the Caribbean until one night in 1946, she struck a reef off Haiti and she sank. Out of the depths of the tragic loss of the original Bluenose comes this beauty, Bluenose 2. And when the wind fills her sails, the same sense of pride fills those who behold her. That same sense of wonder and spirit of adventure that endured in Angus and his beloved schooner rides on the waves and whispers in the wind.
boats and iron men. It was 1921. It was Nova Scotia's sons built the schooner bound for fame, and the Bluenose was her name. They were born upon the tide. The legend lives the whole world wide, standing tall against the wind, wooden boats and iron men. It was 1921. It was Nova Scotia's sons built the schooner bound for fame, and the Bluenose was her